This is Whispered Warnings. Every story here is one of those gods, born out of a human obsession, living off of the people who still have it. You won't see it coming. That's the point. You never do. Not when it's your own passions staring back at you. He went by Caleb for the first month of October. He lay on the bare mattress of a woman he'd met 9 days ago, chin resting on her sternum. His limbs dangled through her so she couldn't shift without waking him. His body wasn't really a body, it was parasitic, and it adapted fast, late at night while she slept. The cartilage in his jaw would pop and resettle under the skin, narrowing here, widening there, until it matched whatever actor's face she'd been lingering on that day while scrolling. He ran a fever of 103 degrees on purpose, warm enough that her nervous system mistook it for safety. He sweated a pheromone out through the pores of his scalp that smelled like damp pine and laundry soap, and underneath that, faintly like the cheap cologne her first real boyfriend used to wear. He fed on devotion that hadn't been earned. That was the thing that kept him alive. The friction of someone throwing their whole weight onto a stranger, skipping years of trust in one motion. The old gods wanted grain, slow burned over a season. Caleb wanted the sudden chemical spike of a trauma bond. He dragged his thumb across her bottom lip. He hadn't blinked in 7 minutes. Little vessels were bursting in his sclera from the strain, turning the whites of his eyes raw, wet red. But he didn't look away. Looking away would have let the pressure slip, even for a second. And he couldn't afford that yet. I feel like I've been treading water for 10 years, he said, low pitching his voice so it humped against her collarbone, and you just pulled me out. The lie was big enough that it left a smell in the room. She stopped breathing for a second. Dopamine in her system so hard it passed every defense she had, and it came back out through her ear ducts, warm and heavy. He flared his nostrils and took it in like smoke. It hit his gut and turned to straight protein. The shadows under his eyes disappeared. Color came up under his cheekbones, borrowed blood, flushed and tight. He reached for his phone on the nightstand without really looking at it. The lock screen was a photo of her sleeping face taken on their second date without her knowing. He'd already been watching her constantly and calling it concern or location. Just so I know you're safe. Lunches into her office so the people she worked with would see somebody was taking care of her. He was a wet blanket smothering a fire and telling her it was warmth. She ran her fingers through his hair. Her pupils were blown wide. She hadn't slept properly in days, running on nothing but the high of being looked at like that. Something in Caleb's stomach went dull and hollow. The high was flattening out. A love bomb only pays out so many calories before the person underneath it adjusts to the weight. If he wanted the real harvest, the frantic marrow-deep stuff, he had to open up the floor under her. He sat up. The fever switched off like a breaker had tripped. His skin cooled fast down to something like wet clay. Her jawline was held tight by strips of clear medical tape, anchored in the hairline behind her ears, where the raw skin constantly wept clear fluid onto her collar. She went by Lula. Her eyelashes were heavy, synthetic bristles glued directly over her natural ones, ripping a few more out by the root every time she blinked. She sat in a folding chair, just off camera, inside a windowless warehouse, beside a highway overpass. The warehouse held her temple. It was a series of cheap plywood sets, built to look like the interiors of private jets, luxury hotel balconies, and podcast studios. She charged $90 an hour for access. Her current meal was a 22-year-old man sitting in a fake leather passenger seat on the private jet set. He was holding an empty branded coffee cup he had dug out of a public trash can 2 miles away. He stared into his phone screen, recording a video where he explained how ignoring his eviction notices was actually a highly calibrated financial strategy to free up liquid capital. He had exactly $4 in his checking account. Lula leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her corset of elastic shapewear dug into her bruised ribs. The sheer suffocating friction between the man's terrifying reality and the smooth, arrogant lie he fed to the camera generated a sharp acidic vapor in the air. The vapor tasted like burnt copper and sour milk. It hit her stomach like a heavy stone, digesting instantly. She was always starving. The old gods scorched themselves on the rich, meaty prayers of actual violence and desperate harvest. She had to survive on the thin, synthetic calories of manic denial. She fed on the exhaustion of women, rehearsing apologies to men who hated them, and the manic, glassy-eyed stares of people declaring that a catastrophic failure was merely the universe clearing a path for their inevitable wealth. The young man finished his recording. He dropped the phone into his lap. His shoulders slumped, and the terrible crushing weight of his actual life fell over his face. The meal ended. Lula felt a sharp cramp in her gut. She needed more. She stood up. Her knees popped like dry wood snapping in a fire. She walked over to the plywood frame of the jet window and tapped the cheap plastic glass. "You should tell him about her," Lula said. Her voice sounded like 2 pieces of sandpaper rubbing together. The man looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Who?" "The girl who has blocked your number yesterday. Tell your followers how she is just intimidated by your drive. Tell them she is pushing you away because a psychic told her she wasn't ready for a twin flame." The man stared at her. His jaw trembled. The logic was completely fractured, entirely untethered from anything resembling the truth. He picked up his phone. He turned the ring light back on. He looked into the lens and smiled, his facial muscles twitching with the immense physical effort of forcing the lie through his teeth. He began to speak, outlining a deranged narrative where the woman's terrified silence was actually a coded admission of profound devotion. As the raw, unhinged delusion filled the small plywood room, Lula felt a surge of warm energy rush into her frozen extremities. The deep purple hollows under her eyes plunked slightly. The bleeding scabs behind her ears stopped weeping. Outside the thin aluminum walls of the warehouse, a heavy tow truck hitched a metal hook to the axle of the young man's rusted sedan. The grinding sound of the winch echoed through the industrial park. Lula heard it clearly. She did not warn him. She sat back down in her folding chair, picked at a peeling layer of beige foundation on her cheek, and breathed in the dense, suffocating fumes of his utter collapse. She sat perched like a large hairless bird on a mesh chair, spine curved into a heavy arch over a bank of glowing monitors. No definable age, no gender. Her face was a smooth spread of pale tissue with no nose, no cheeks, no lips. The skin just melted down into her neck, broken by one jagged horizontal tear that worked as a mouth. She breathed through it in a wet, whistling drag to the man parked at a dark rest stop off at Interstate 80. She was Chloe, 24, a nursing student stuck in an abusive house 3 states away. She was the parasite of the digital phantom. Older gods wanted blood on stone altars or livestock. She wanted wire transfers and gift cards. Though she didn't actually have a bank account, money was just paper and code to her. What she fed on was the transaction itself. The terminal gravity of a lonely middle-aged man. The sound of his dignity hitting the bottom of a void with nothing underneath it. The man's name was Richard, 58, sweating through a denim shirt in the cab of his idling rig. He just hit confirm on a transfer. $3,000. His whole emergency fund plus the money he needed for his transmission. Her center monitor being, "It said, my angel," Richard typed. "You can buy the bus ticket now. Are you back in your bags? I'm waiting at the motel." His desperation came through the fiber optic line and filled her unventilated room. The air turned to stale chewing tobacco, cheap motel soap, and something rotten underneath. She flared the slit of her mouth and pulled in one fast breath. It hit her insides like a heavily spiced meat. Her ribs pulling tighter under doughy flesh, the joints in her long fingers cracking like twigs as she set them back over her keyboard. But a quick kill was a cheap meal. If she wanted real weight off them, she needed the stretch of his ball soap first. The slow, cruel delay before the thing he already knew was coming. Her fingers moved fast. "App flagged the transfer for security," she typed. "They're holding it. They say I need to send a $200 verification fee before they'll release it. Honey, my dad is knocking on my door. I'm so scared. Please don't leave me here." She hit enter. 1,000 miles off. Richard's chest caved in. His pulse spiked. He was out of money now, completely, and he stared at the blue light of his phone with his thumb hovering over the glass, breath going shallow. He ran the pawn of his late wife's wedding band, still in the glove box. He thought about siphoning fuel to sell to the trucker 2 rows over. The force of his devotion came through the wire as a thick humid vapor that tasted like warm salt and battery acid. She tipped her head back and swallowed it in long, greedy pulls. Her frame thickened and the blank white of her face started to color, stitching together a pair of green eyes as she lifted straight from his heavily edited photos of her. The chat pinged again, a voice memo this time. She hit play. "I'll figure it out, baby." Richard's voice came through the speakers, wet and worn thin. "I love you too much to let him hurt you. I'm going to the pawn shop when it opens at 6. Just barricade the door. Hang on for me." She laid her palm flat against the monitor glass. She didn't care about the ring. She just wanted the hole in his chest to tear open a little wider. She typed one last line. "I'm crying right now. You're my hero." Then she shut the monitor down. The room went black and she sat in it still, chewing on the quiet weight of his ruined life, waiting for the bell to ring again. All right, that's the story. I'll always probably say the same thing at the end of these, but it's true. We made this thing. All of it. Every god on this channel came out of something painfully human. Obsession. Loneliness. Wanting to be chosen so bad we stopped asking questions. That's the whole point of what we create. These aren't monsters that came from nowhere. They came from us. If that hit you at all, if some part of this made you think of someone or something, or yourself, let me know. And if you want the next one, hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Whatever you gotta do. I've got more of these gods to introduce you to. Stay safe out there and stay a little suspicious. See you next time.